Now I'm going to take you on a journey today. I'm going to take you on a journey that really builds around this theme of built to think, but built to evolve. And it's the issue at hand is that we're evolving so quickly now that we've got to take this world on this journey with us, and that involves values, it involves trust, integrity in every single aspect of what we do today. And so I'm going to talk about 4 key areas. The first is, I'm just going to hop back to look at industrial revolutions and ask ourselves to think about what happened on the back of each industrial revolution as we now enter the 5th. The second is I'm going to talk about what I describe as the conscious code. It's a book I wrote last year, looking at the implications of what happens if we happen to engineer consciousness. And now is the time that we should be thinking about that, that particular issue. The third area I'm going to talk about is synthetic souls. And this is taking a step forward and assuming that we have engineered consciousness. How do we coexist with other beings, other agents that are non-human? And then lastly, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the next horizon and what we can expect to the year out. Now, with all of the sections that I'll talk about today, I'm going to begin with 2035. Now, 2035 isn't far away, right? When we think back to 2015, it wasn't all that far away. But here is, we can imagine we're going to have a scenario where we'll wake up in the morning, our smart kitchen and smart home will adjust the environment around us according to our moods, our health. We can imagine our kids having pets, for example, that are digital twins of either pets that have come before in the family or new pets, or, you know, a change out of a pet who's perhaps not as not behaving itself as what it should. But most importantly, this is a scenario where it becomes quite blurred, the boundaries between our personal lives and technology and our working lives. Okay, let's talk about industrial revolutions. Now, what's really important to understand with each industrial revolution, beginning with the first, is that when we see the convergence of logistics, communications, and energy systems, we find ourselves in a world where we are profoundly creating new value. And much is the same with the second industrial revolution, much is the same with the third industrial revolution, much is the same with the fourth industrial revolution, where in a world today it's characterized by renewable energies, communication systems are now becoming satellite driven as well as 5th and 6th generation wireless driven. And so we've got to really think thoughtfully about the 5th industrial revolution, which we are now on the very beginnings thereof. Now, what is the fifth industrial revolution? What will characterize this differently compared to other industrial revolutions is that it's the human AI co-creation that makes the difference. When it comes to energy systems, we're going to be talking about renewables, hydrogen, decarbonisation of the future. When it comes to logistics, our supply chains will become a lot more autonomous. We'll see robotics, and again, when it comes to communications, they'll be much more wireless, much more satellite driven. There'll come a point in time where not being connected, whether that's within a building or anywhere in the world, will become yesterday's story. It's a bit like electricity. You just turn the switch and you expect power to be there. You turn the tap and you just expect water to be there. You turn on your device and you will just expect that, that connectivity will be there as well. So let's talk about the human-machine engineering. And the reason why this is really important is because of demographic reasons. Now, let me just pause on a very, very important point. Today in India, there are more than 5 million engineers training on AI co-pilots. Now, out to 2030, there will be two very significant demographic groups referred to as Gen Z and Gen Alpha. That is those that were born around the year 2000. That will be the first demographic groups born to be AI first. They will not know a world without AI. Just like millennials didn't know the world without the internet. And then you had Gen Zs, I've got 3 of them. They don't know the world without smartphones. Gen Alpha and Gen Zs will not know the world without AI. Now, why is this important for India? It's important because by 2030, 1 in 3 people in your population, estimated to be 1.5 billion, are going to be of those 2 generations. That's approximately 500 million people. Now, your next closest, let's just say, competitor, China, will only have 230 million of them. Why? Because of their ageing population, their one-child policies in the past. And so this is very important to understand that India has one of the most remarkable opportunities to leverage the youth that you have to drive this new future. Okay, so we've talked about industrial revolutions, we've talked about the importance of demographic change, and the fact that you've got a greater supply of the demographics that matter compared to any other nation on earth puts India in a very, very strong position. So, if code is our future's architecture, will we be the authors of it, or will we just users of it? So let's now just hop back into 2035. Our cities will become vibrant, alive, self-balanced, autonomous. Healthcare systems will be operating in real time, distributed, where home care will become an integral part of daily life. Transport systems will be autonomous. Education will have AI mentors helping and aiding teachers in the education of our systems. So not just software code, but values embedded in trust, fairness, and well-being. The conscious code isn't about faster machines. It's us deciding what it's worth thinking about. So, we've seen the age of machines, steam, coal, electricity, digital, AI, but now we've got a shift that's now occurring, and it's not just about machines evolving, it's about humanity deciding the direction that we wish to take ourselves. And here there's really 3 forces at play: technology, society, and values. And so the core message here is that progress without values is not sustainable. The next revolution will be conscious design of our future. And so the question's no longer about what machines can do, but what should we allow them to do? Now, when we look at these 3 forces, in the technology world, we can expect technologies that will set the scene for us being around artificial intelligence, which we've talked about, but the difference here is about shifting from technology that can think to technology that can feel. Quantum technologies and quantum computing will also be characterized in this next industrial revolution, as will biotech and also the Internet of Senses. Today, we've been able to digitize 2 of our 5 senses, that is sight and sound. We are now rapidly working towards digitizing our breath, our touch, as well as our taste. And so when machines have the capacity to feel what we feel, then what rights and ownership should they really have? What values do we want to engineer in those? So the challenge is, how do we align these forces consciously? Now, when we think about the future, we need to think about the demographic change, as I spoke about. We need to think about the values, such as trust, fairness, sovereignty, and sustainability, but also equality and other human aspects. And, we're seeing regulations now starting to be discussed and formed around these ideal concepts. And so every algorithm is really or becomes a policy choice. And if code is our future's architecture, will we write it or will we let it write us? So we've talked about consciousness, and we've talked about the importance of thinking about this in a values sense. And so the question is no longer can machines think, it's what happens when they begin to feel. What rights should they have? So again, let's go out to 2035. Here we have a young engineer and conscious AI, and AI is sensing this young engineer's environment, his mood, the home life, and really adjusts everything in his life according to how he's feeling. Tools all of a sudden shift from becoming things within the environment to having relationships with them. And so when machines think and care, what does partnership really mean? Now, I won't spend too much time on this, but I've had some conversations with you guys over the last day or so around this. Sovereignty is becoming a very significant global development, not only at a regional level, but also at a national level. We understand data sovereignty because we've been working on that around the world for quite some time. But now with AI on the scene, governments are now starting to think about sovereignty when it comes to AI models. We've already seen sovereignty when it comes to clouds, and that's why the major cloud providers have also had to move to architectures to decentralize from having facilities purely at a data center level, purely in the United States, or at a regional level to being in country. And much is the same with networks as well, and we saw this play out in terms of 5G mobile networks. And so I guess the point here is that engineering sovereignty, designing for sovereignty, will become a more important principle in the way with which you approach your work. So we need to shift from design thinking to self-evolving systems. Evolving systems such as digital twins, generative design, and there's some wonderful examples here. When we look at Tesla cars, for example, they just update overnight while the car's parked in the garage and on charging up. We've got to think about shifting from an engineering perspective, from solving problems to curating the solution to those problems, incorporating AI with how we work. And so humans, from a design perspective, will become orchestrators as well as co-collaborating, I guess, with other AI capabilities. Gartner, for example, predict that by 2030, 80% of all innovation will have some form of AI incorporated within its development. And so we will still need design, but we need to evolve our systems with it. Now, the Internet of Senses that I referred to before, this is truly exciting because, as I mentioned, to date we've had been able to digitize 2 of our 5 senses, but we're now being able to digitize our breath, for example, which is a wonderful diagnostic tool, as we learned, for COVID. We can, in fact, detect COVID through somebody's breath. Italians are putting that to the challenge in terms of their garlic prawns, and so are the Spanish, but nonetheless it's quite robust. The breath is a very, very robust sense when used in healthcare. When we think about vision, AI has the capacity to detect tumours that are invisible to the doctor's eye. When it comes to sound, humans are limited in the frequencies that we can hear. Other animals, for example, dogs can hear frequencies that we simply can't. So when we think about this kind of evolving world, in the Internet of Senses with consciousness, all of a sudden we're confronted by, a technology that has the capacity to feel at much greater levels than what humans can. And this is why society and our values are so important as we think about developing this technology. And so if products sense more than us, what does that mean for trust, design, and control? So we can't have this conversation without thinking about the environment. When we think about where we've come from, in the first industrial revolution, from steam power, second to energy, used in electricity, the fifth is going to be powered by sustainability, and our survival really depends on this. Renewables have now hit 90% of the world's energy, and clean technology has now attracted more than $650 billion US so far, and projected out to 2030. And so the engineering's role here, the use of clever digital twin technology to preserve the use of other resources to emulate or create things that they could be designing will be really quite important. And we can see this being applied now in really advanced surgeries, for example, where brain surgeons will emulate a whole surgical procedure using a digital twin. So it offers an incredible opportunity for us to think very, very differently about that. So the only future worth engineering is the one that engineers with the planet, not against the planet. Now, conscious design is really about the next frontier, and machines that adapt and feel will be able to create things that we may not necessarily understand. And so this is why it's, again, quite important to ensure that values are engineered into all of the algorithms that we create. So the engineering challenge is not just about capability, but it's about identity, empathy, ethics, and function versus feeling. And so the question here is, are we really ready to engineer machines that not only think with us, but also feel with us? So, wiring the mind. There are so many remarkable developments going on around the world right now with brain-computer interfaces. Neuralink is probably one of the most well-known. It's not the only one, but it's one of the ones that is well-known, where all of a sudden we can rectify issues associated with someone's cognitive limitations, whether that's through birth or whether that's through an accident. And so, for centuries, I guess, tools have extended our bodies, but tools are now extending our minds. And cognitive augmentation in terms of our memory, problem solving, patients that have had strokes, all of a sudden can have those remediated through these kinds of technologies is truly exciting. And so by 2035, neural interfaces will be as common as what pacemakers are today. So from therapy to enhancement, students being able to learn different languages through direct cognitive implants. And so when thoughts connect to machines, You know, who controls the codes in the mind? Where are your rights? Who owns the rights, in many respects, to your thoughts? Cities will become alive, and they'll become mirrors of their age. They're not just going to be smart, they're going to be conscious by design, co-shaping life, and we can start seeing examples of this already emerge. In Singapore, for example, we've got traffic that's managed by artificial intelligence. They use predictive healthcare as well, looking at preventative medicine versus treatment systems. In Seoul and Shanghai, they're using digital twins, integral as part of their urban planning. And so cities are like living laboratories in many respects. They'll be not only compositions of human, but also machine by co-design. But coming back to the big question here around ethics is, who owns the data? Who owns the rights to your thought? You know, and this is quite contentious already, because this is about empowerment versus surveillance, for example. And, you know, resilience in many respects is going geopolitical in this area. And so will AI design cities for us, or force us to adapt to the cities that they create for us? Okay, we've now thought about the conscious code and what are the implications of artificial consciousness. Now let's take a look at what happens when souls possibly become synthetic. So let's go back into 2035, where classrooms and synthetic teachers with empathy and memory are educating our children. We have laboratories with engineers and quantum minds that are solving problems that are impossible today. You know, family homes become immersive worlds for all characters within the family. This isn't just a tech story, it's our choice. And it's about shared authorship or separation. So, let's now think about transitioning to this next frontier. So we're moving from AI that predicts to systems that imagine and seek meaning. And we talked about this in the context of some neuroscience. But if machines can be conscious, well, then what comes after that? Curiosity, creativity, purpose. What does that mean for us? And so quantum technology will be one of the most profound developments upon which we have today. If we think that AI is fast today, my goodness, what's going to happen when we start sitting that on top of quantum technologies? And so, you know, the link between this technology and other technologies will profoundly change the way we think about intelligence, because, you know, intelligence will all of a sudden live in probability. Where we've got a technology like quantum technology that can have and calculate infinite possibilities, we move from thinking about intelligence in terms of certainty to then in terms of probability. And so, you know, when we reflect back, we think about, you know, the strength that steam gave us, the reach that electricity gave us, the speed that AI is given us. You know, where do the boundaries blur? Here, you know, post-human is not about replacement, but it's about expansion. And co-design in identity, biologically and digitally, are going to be some of the key steps along that pathway. So post-human horizon is not an end, but it's the beginning of choosing what being human really does mean. So, a hopeful horizon. You know, after all of the disruption, you know, we must end with hope. And the future is created and designed, not given. And so when humans and machines are co-designing, they're doing that and need to do that not in dominance, but also in partnership. And this is where inclusivity, sustainability become very, very important to consider in the values around the algorithms that we're designing. The future's not waiting, it's waiting to be designed, and with fear or hope. So let me now just summarize. We began the journey by thinking about industrial revolutions and demographic change, and where we got to was we're on the cusp of the fifth industrial revolution, and we know by fact that India is one of the best positioned countries in the world to capitalize on the abundance of youth you have today and right through to 2030. We talked about the conscious code and the ability for technology and society to incorporate values that we want in this technology. We then talked about synthetic souls and the importance of sovereignty and sensory technology that has the capacity beyond human capacity across many of these. And lastly, we talked and touched on the next horizon, which is going to be characterized by quantum thinking, planetary worlds. And so what future will we choose to design? I think that is the key question here. And so, history tells us that change is engineered, right? We know this through all of the industrial revolutions. We need frameworks to consider, values, consciousness, and without values being engineered, there is no sustainability. But we do need to think about agency, because technology will move and will evolve. And so the fifth industrial revolution won't be about machines alone. It will be co-authored by us if we act with wisdom and purpose. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope it's opened your minds to the opportunities and the wonderful future that all of these technologies offer. Everything that I've discussed and shared with you this morning and much more is available in my 2 books. I wish you all the very best for today and I hope you enjoy all the insights. And again, my thanks to the NASSCOM team. Thank you.